Friends, last time you and I got together with a couple of Datsuns and a Nissan, we drove the 1980 280ZX Turbo 10th Anniversary Edition with, and I know I'm repeating myself, 196 original miles. But believe it or not, today we're going to drive something even more special to me. That is the 1984 300ZX Turbo 50th Anniversary Edition. When this car came out in '84, granted, I couldn't drive. I didn't know what turbo meant, but I thought this car was incredibly cool. So join me as we realize a childhood dream of mine and drive this. So this is something that is truly special. This started life as a Turbo Z, but it had every possible option you could get on the Turbo Z of that year. Then you've got the typical Z gauges over here. These are effectively kind of pseudo-digital. You've got an acceleration meter and you've got a compass. I think the best way to describe this is like Tron meets Shibuya Girls circa 1984. Were there even Shibuya Girls in 1984? I don't know. Anyway, let me know. So in 1983, when Nissan or Datsun, whatever you want to call it at that point, made the switch to the Z31, they made a huge shift in the Z car world. They went from an inline six to a V6 configuration. Now this one's a 3-liter turbocharged V6. It puts out 200 horsepower and 227 pound-feet of torque, which comes in at 3,600 RPM. That translated to a 0 to 60 time of a then incredible 7.3 seconds. I say incredible because the car we drove before, the 280ZX Turbo, that was 9.3 seconds to 60. So in 4 years, they chopped it by 2 seconds. That's pretty incredible. But by comparison, remember the weight over there was 2875. In that same 4 years, they went up to 3,221 pounds here. Another interesting thing to note here, this was the last year of an oil-cooled turbo. Remember the days when you had to leave the car running so the turbos would cool before you would turn it off? Well, this was the last year you kind of had to really do it. So driving dynamics. I always feel a little weird talking about driving dynamics with older cars because a lot of it is a function of how the specific car you're driving is set up. Now, this one is the reference build, if you really think about it. It's 10,000 miles. It's about the nicest one you're going to find. But let's say for the sake of discussion, one of my camera guys, he's got one of these, not the anniversary, but he's got this vintage of Z, and his is, 200,000 miles. It's a rough car, but you know what? It's still going strong. So that is the spectrum you're dealing with. So if we're looking at this as driving dynamics, it's, you know what? When you think about the vintage, mid-80s Japanese sports car, that's exactly how it drives. It's got some get up and go, but you're not talking a 5-second car, you're talking a 7-second car. That would be fast back in the mid-80s. This does have an adjustable suspension. I gotta be honest with you, I don't notice a huge difference. Let's try the S, going around this S turn and see how that does. It leans a little bit less, but there's a lot of body roll in this thing. Really a lot of body roll. And that's, I think, a function more of the weight than it is the suspension. And for 1984, if you wanted a sports car, you would probably get the RX-7. Smaller, lighter, a little bit faster, especially the RX-7 2 years after this came out. That's when they changed to the second gen, and then in '87 they did the RX-7 with a turbo. But again, two different cars. This is a much more luxurious car. So as with our 280ZX Turbo, we have T-tops here. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, would love to see T-tops on Zs again. Randy, do you think you can get on that for us? That opens up to show really a special interior here. And again, when I saw this thing in the magazines, I fell in love with it. This was kind of like super luxury, even for a Japanese car. So you got leather seats that have a different stitching pattern than the base turbo. You got the embroidery in the seat here. You've got the super duper deluxe hi-fi stereo. You've got electronic climate control over there, and you even have controls for the audio on the steering wheel. That was like unheard of back in the day. And then it's got this like Tron-esque kind of digital display. If you even saw like the 200SX back in the day on the same vintage, even the interior on that was cool looking. Nissan was kind of ahead of its time. They were doing then what Porsche does now with all the buttons everywhere. Kind of like to see that again. Now this one's got the adjustable suspension, so you got a switch here, dual controllers for the mirror. It's got a bladder system in that seat, so you can adjust via pneumatics the lateral support, even the thigh support here, and there's still a height adjustment on that seat. Now, there's one thing that I am saving to last here, and that's these little knobs here, but I think we need to go drive it to find out what they do. Absolute favorite feature of this. Now, I'm not going to turn the radio up on this because of legal reasons, but it has a body sonic amplifier. So, depending on the kind of music you played, the seat would reverberate to the music. Now, you can't hear the music, but I do have, I think I'm in Tennessee, so I've got a country music station playing. Now, there are two things that are amazing about that. Number one, country music is shaking my butt right now. And number two, a 31-year-old car, this system still actually works. Think about that. This kind of a gimmicky thing that you figured would break within the warranty period works and works well. It's actually somewhat strangely arousing, if I must be honest. So in our last Classic Z episode, you and I talked about the 10th anniversary package. But now we have a 50th anniversary package, but let's do a little math here. This one was celebrating 10 years of Datsun Z in 1980, but this is a 50th anniversary package in 1984. So in reality, either the math is very wrong or it's celebrating something else. This is celebrating 50 years of Nissan. And this package was, as you can see, two-tone paint like here, stripes like here, stickers, but this one is like turbo, splattered all over the place. The wheels have the gold inset again. The T-top has a different tinting on it. The badge up front's a little bit different as well. But this one, it came complete with a car cover. Now the whole package, it would basically gave you everything I'm showing you and then everything you could get as optional to a regular turbo. The only option you could do on this was automatic or manual. Sadly, this one is fitted with the automatic. So the price of this car in 1984 was $27,500. Now, as a basis of comparison and to give you an idea of inflation in just 4 years, the 280ZX Turbo was $17,000. So I feel it important that we need to discuss the contemporaries of this car. So this is 84 when this car came out, and it was, 83 that this was a new model year. But it was only a couple of years before that, 81, that the Brits, they stopped selling cars in the US. 81 was the Triumph TR8, and basically after that, no more MGs, no more typical sports cars. Then it was the rise of the Japanese sports car. Remember the 82 Superman? That was groundbreaking. It was still very much based on the Celica, but they had enough differentiation where it was really a different vehicle. Then this came along and it was even more competitive with the Supra, but it wasn't like any other car in the lineup where the Supra still had that Celica DNA in it. Then there was the RX-7, but that was always its own car, its own platform, smaller, lighter, and obviously the rotary engine. And even the American cars at that point, they weren't really that competitive. Like a Corvette of the same era, not very powerful. So I like to put these in a segment, not really Melee's era, like late 70s, but kind of in between the last of the British cars and the first of really some great cars. Like the Miata came out in 89, and then more powerful sports cars came out, like Chevy introduced the ZR1 Corvette, and you started to see power come to sports cars again. So this was kind of a nice sweet spot in between an odd era. So it's pretty well known that Datsun changed the name of its cars to its corporate name, Nissan. So here you got Datsun. But over here, you got Datsun and Nissan. So what gives? Well, this is a 1984 model year car, and that was the official changeover year. So every model that year had both Datsun and Nissan. 85 and forward, they were all Nissans. And then there's the whole visceral experience. You're sitting low in a Japanese sports car, way behind the engine, long hood, short deck. It's a very angular design. It's two-tone paint, it's stripes, there's stickers everywhere, buttons all over the interior, which I love. This cool digital dash. But you know what? You're looking down the hood, and you got a hood scoop, and you're like, you know what? This is kind of as I remember it. Granted, I wasn't even near driving when this thing was new, but wow, it's special. Even today, it's still special. Now, granted, this one is the nicest one out there, and it's probably a little bit more special, but it's an important car for Nissan because it was the first step in taking the Z from really the original size car. Yeah, there was the 240, 260, and 280, but they were all kind of the same size vehicles. This was a big step forward for Nissan. This was taking it, their sports car, and making it more GT. In summary, what do we got? Well, we've got a Z car that's kind of stepped away from Matsuura-san's original formula. Now, is that a bad thing? No. This is a bigger car, it's a faster car, and frankly, it does more. But by this time in Z car history, it was competing against much stiffer competition, and frankly, it was holding its weight. And at that point, people were taking this car seriously. Think about it, it was, what, 14 years prior to this car that John Morton and Peter Brock were kicking everybody's asses with Zs. And then you had all those years of people finally taking this car seriously, where we got to a point where, you know what, I will spend $27,500 for this car. And in total, they produced 5,168 of these cars. Now, I have a question for you. This is a special edition Z31. There was another special edition Z31. What was it, and why was it special? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Now, you're going to have to come back for our next and last Classic Car Z episode when we drive what is arguably the sweetheart of the bunch. This one, the leather is not, I would say it's showing its age, not its mileage. Because again, this is 10,000 miles on this car, but for some reason it looks like this part here has not worn as well as this part here.